Hello students, now I will be dealing with Unit 2 of Module 10. It will focus on approaches, methods and techniques. I would say that there are 5 qualitative approaches. They are ethnography, narrative, phenomenological, grounded theory and case study. Qualitative content analysis is another qualitative approach used in understanding the meaning of the content. Ethnography, for example, is the systematic study of people and its culture. It has its roots in social and cultural anthropology, where we study behavioral patterns and cultural norms along with values. Ethnographic study follows what we would say as a participatory method, wherein the researcher would stay for a long period of time in the natural setting of a group. It might be a community or a village. This would help him or her to have a deeper understanding. For example, in communication research, one of the earliest examples can be that of Professor Lakshman Rao's study of 2 Indian villages. This study was based on assumptions that communication play a significant role in the development and that the relationship is constant and cumulative one. In the narrative research, it is an intensive study of the processes that shape the context being observed. For example, a communication or a media researcher interested in examining oral communication patterns that have led to conflict resolution in certain regions would adopt this. It is also called as an immersive method, where the researcher would stay amidst the people and make detailed notes as the patterns unravel and are used. A set of questions would guide the observation and its systematic narration. The third method in qualitative research is what I would say is phenomenological. It is, as the name suggests, an intensive study of a phenomenon as it happens. It can be used in media studies. For example, the arrival of a new communication platform or device. There can be detailed interaction, notes of interviews with 1 or 2 key persons, examination of documents and papers. Policy analysts usually adopt this technique. For example, a researcher intending to study the prevalence of a specific pattern of behavior consequent to the adoption of a new media of communication would visit the institution, talk to key decision makers, also perhaps access the memoirs and documents of key decision makers with regard to the medium or technology. We move on to the fourth method, which is grounded theory. This is usually considered as a method of constructing theory. Grounded theory uses a set of procedures to generate theory, in which the field research and interviews are the tools used for collecting data. Let us say you want to study the representation of victims of atrocities and you want to study it in the newspapers. Your aim is based on the assumption that media tends to highlight certain sensational aspects and ignores the rights of the victims, or perhaps is not sensitive to their plight. You would choose a fairly long period, let us say about 3 years, and then select 3 or 4 newspapers. You would analyze their contents to arrive at answers to your questions and concerns. I move on to another method, which is a case study. A case study, as the name suggests, is also an in-depth study which could be of that of an individual, a group, an organization, or an event. This case selected for a study is based on the assumption that it represents cases of a particular time. Hence, a single case will provide the incentive or the insight of the group it belongs to. Case studies also describe the situation and circumstances of the case to shed light on aspects that are of importance to researchers and industry bodies. Communication and media discipline case studies are very common. They are used to understand micro context, where rather than being preoccupied with a method, a combination of methods such as interviews, focus group discussions, and role play are adopted to present the study. This in turn can explain, reinforce, or refute a theoretical construct or a model. There is immense scope for case studies in the field of mass communication in India. One, for example, can choose a thriving community radio station to describe how it attained the success status, how a community radio has empowered the marginalized and the voiceless communities. Similarly, one can also study a top-ranking publication to illustrate its success story based on data collected from the chosen publication, its readers, and advertisers. I move on to content analysis, which many in communication and media use quite often. Berelson, for example, has defined content analysis as a research technique for the objective, systematic, and quantitative description of the manifest content of communication. By using the concepts, techniques, and objectives, Berelson understands the process of analytics as a reliable and learnable method. This precludes the personal authority of the researcher. However, Berelson's definition does not capture the qualitative and the latent perspective in the analysis. In order to make the method applicable both in a quantitative and a qualitative approach and without specifying the depth of analysis, this observation has come from Krippendorff, who also has a major work on content analysis. Textual analysis or semiotics adopts a qualitative method for analyzing latent content, and they have gone beyond what is contained in the text and focused on the content of the cinema. For example, Ananda Mitra's work, where he has studied Mahabharata, the epic, as the telecast version, adopting methods developed within the cultural studies. Mitra has conducted a textual analysis of the television serial, the Mahabharata. In the qualitative analysis of the serial, he focuses on its signifying practices and narrative strategies specific to television. He relates his conclusions about Indian television to the political, social, and cultural movements in India. Film studies that example the ideology of cinema also adopt a similar approach. For example, Madhava Prasad, in his book on ideology in Hindi cinema, explains many of these techniques. One specific example would be of Roja, which has been analyzed by a cultural studies person, Tejaswini Niranjan. She analyzes the representation of the state and the Indian middle class. What are the techniques then? Textual analysis or broadly semiotics, no doubt, is a critical technique, but it has the weakness of imposing both a frame of analysis and interpretation. In this method, the researchers and their study gain importance rather than what the author of the text intended to express. Films as texts are analyzed independent of what the filmmaker wants to say. The content is analyzed based on other realities. For example, the dominant aspects of caste or glorifying certain aspects of history. Cultural theories use this approach, whereas the content of the film or book or newspaper is analyzed against the backdrop of broader issues in society. We will now move on to some of the major studies in India which have used qualitative methodologies. The site studies, as has been already mentioned, it can be regarded as an example of an integrated approach. The research was carried out at 3 levels. For example, it was conceived as a baseline study, which they described it as level O, and the process when the experiment actually took off was at level 1, and after the experiment was ended, they described it as summative or level 2. This method uses diary notes and case study. For example, the study of custodians, that is people who man television, by Ahmed, is an illustration where Ahmed stayed in the village and recorded the details of the viewing context, how the custodian was managing the viewing of the program and the various problems associated with it. Site historians have recorded in a major work on some of the research methodologies they used. Planning Commission, ISRO, Bangalore University all have used a combination of these techniques, including qualitative methods. People like Yashpal and Sarabhai, who are examining the larger context of television for development, have also relied on understanding television in a broader context. Anthropologists, as I have already stated, have also stayed in the village and used participant methods to gain an understanding of the village and who is being studied. Many research conducted in site during that period have utilized the best traditions of not only quantitative but qualitative methods. Let me summarize for you what I have tried to do in the module on qualitative research. I would say we need not treat quantitative method as an opposition to qualitative. Many would argue that rigorous research can adopt both these methods. What is important is, what is the question that you have in mind? Qualitative methods many a time are critiqued because they don't have a measurable effect in social sciences. Communication and media studies are located in both these traditions and have gained acceptance. Thank you very much.